In the know, nonstop Vikings talk. It's Purple Daily on Score North and ScoreNorth.com. Purple Daily, presented by Surly Brewing Company.
Welcome in, fellow Vikings fan masochists. This is Purple Daily, daily Vikings entertainment, where we just want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl before we die. Our schedule's kind of wonky the next couple days because old Macadac's in the middle of a move. Judd had some stuff pop up this morning, and we said, all right, Dex and I are going to hop on, give you guys a little feedback Friday on a Thursday, starting with a question about maybe the best cornerback in Vikings history that we never knew we needed at the beginning of the season. Wasn't even part of the organization at the beginning of the season. Some Duke Shelley discussion off the top here and some other fodder. But the show is presented by our friends, as always, at TCL, now an official partner of the NFL. No matter what you watch, TCL has award-winning TVs for any budget, any space, all with stunning picture quality. TCL gives you more than just TVs. They offer mobile products, audio devices, home appliances. TCL brings you joy and simplicity through innovative technology. Also, if you are a Timberwolves fan, last night, and then, of course, Kevin Durant got traded last night as everyone was going to bed. We did an emergency D'Angelo Russell from Mike Conley and Other Pieces podcast, Flagrant Howls, Mackey and Judd sort of mashup over on the Score North YouTube channel, the Mackey and Judd podcast feed, and the Flagrant Howls podcast feed. But Dex, let's you and I go through some of this feedback here. You guys can always hit us up through the Score North app. We take emails through that feedback tab in the app. We're always monitoring Twitter and the YouTube comment section. Whether you have a question, a comment, a critique, whether you hate us, love us, we take all kinds of feedback here. So Mike T says, I'm compelled to get this off my chest. Something you guys said earlier this week on Purple Daily is driving me nuts. Should the Vikings re-sign Duke Shelley? Here's a guy who has proven at the NFL level in big spots he can make big plays despite not being in the organization in the offseason. We're desperate for corners, and you guys are saying, well, but he's undersized. There's likely a regression coming. Only if we can sign him on the cheap. Excuse me? This guy's inevitable regression is a theory, the same way Cousins can win a Super Bowl is a theory. In fact, Shelley has in the game measurables which are more important than, say, combine measurables. Shelley is a free agent. The Vikings are actually going to, if they don't re-sign Shelley, Patrick Peterson and Chandler Sullivan going to lose their three starting cornerbacks from the end of the season. But, Dex, what is your, I guess if there was on Underdog Fantasy, like an over or under, what is your faith in Duke Shelley if they were to bring him back, continuing to play at the level that he played like the last 2 months of the season?
I mean, he was insanely good for them, and everything kind of clicked. At least everyone noticed him in the Buffalo game, obviously, when he made that big-time pass deflection in the end zone. I believe that would have potentially tied the game for them in that crazy back-and-forth game. But then afterwards, I mean, he was pretty damn good. Opponents only completed 45% of their passes against Duke Shelley. He's extremely undersized, and I think that's what is concerning, because a cornerback being 5'9" with cleats on, if you will. I mean, I check in at 5'9", so obviously,
is that how that works? Like, he's listed at 5'9". Does he get to measure himself with like the long cleats you would wear at Soldier Field?
I know
so he's really like 5'2", but he wore the long cleats on the day of the measurement.
I know Doogie once said on a scoop session that he said 5'9" is pushing it. He said, and Doogie's not a taller guy like us either. So he said, if I'm about eye level with him without his cleats on, I mean, that 5'9's pushing it there. But look, he has figured out a way to still be a pretty successful cornerback. Look, you're not going to go out and give him a humongous contract. Is he worth bringing back? 100%. They're so starved for cornerback play right now, and they're looking for anything that is somewhat of consistent. You have to do it. And even though the sample size of, a 55 passer rating against, and he was able to shut down guys for the most part. The only game he really got torched was the Patriots game on Thanksgiving night last season. I think you bring this guy back. And to be honest, he's not going to play hardball. He's not going to say, just because I played really well in these 8 games that I was active in and I played well, that you need to give me a big deal. I think they both can reach a side that is a pretty reasonable contract, and he's a solid building block here, in my opinion, to take a flyer on.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious, like, is he going to play hardball? Is he going to, like, what is his approach going to be with the Vikings? Or is it going to be, so this is crazy. I just found this on Pro Football Focus. So Of the, let's see here, how many qualified cornerbacks? Looks like about 100. Oh my gosh. Okay, of the 136 qualified cornerbacks, man coverage grade. Now, this is what Brian Flores wants to do a lot more of. The Vikings played mostly zone coverage on the back end, playing off the line of scrimmage, keep everything in front of you, even though that didn't really work. And Brian Flores is going to come in much more aggressive. He's going to leave cornerbacks on the outside on an island, cover 0, cover 1. So you need guys that can hold their own in man coverage. Here are the Pro Football Focus top-graded cornerbacks in man coverage last year. Number 1, Marlon Humphrey for Baltimore. Number 2, Duke Shelley, Minnesota Vikings. Ahead of Sauce Gardner, Patrick Surtain, Stephon Gilmore, and Marco Wilson. So he had an 84.5 grade in man coverage out of 100, and he was targeted just 15 times. And this also includes postseason. I think he was targeted a couple times in that Giants game in man coverage. So quarterbacks were 6 for 15, 40% throwing against Duke Shelley in man coverage. He only allowed 56 yards on 67 man coverage snaps last year. Now, 67 man coverage snaps is a very small sample size. And I think what I can't get past here, so I'll say I want him back. I don't think I don't think he's all of a sudden going to command like $10 million a year because he had a good 6-week stretch at the end. But he became probably your most reliable. If you're looking for guys that can translate, that are currently on the team or were on the team and now are free agents, to do what Brian Flores wants you to do. I mean, small sample size, but he did the things that Brian Flores needs. So even if there's some regression, let's say he's like 75% this player, he's probably still a starter for you, right?
Yeah. And he played in 100% of snaps, including the playoffs, 6 times last year. And a lot of that was necessity because Dantzler went out and they were thin at corner. But he held his own in those situations. And look, when you're kind of plucked in here and you can show that you can play a little bit, I think that shows that he's a solid building block player, and it's worth bringing him back. And if he regresses hardcore, well, then you find another cornerback. Like, this isn't something where it's life or death. They bring him back, but they should bring him back, and he should be able to find ways to be successful. And I'm sure Brian Flores would love to get his teeth in him and potentially even make him a better cornerback.
Yeah. It's also interesting in that, so he was drafted out of Kansas State, 6th round, 2019, by the Bears. And so he spent the first 3 seasons in Chicago. He basically didn't play in 2019. He was more of a special teams guy, I'm guessing. He played 8 defensive snaps. And then he started to mix in as a slot cornerback in 2020 and 21. So before he got to the Vikings, or before he got plucked by the Vikings from the Bears, he played like 90 to 95% of his snaps in the slot, and he wasn't very good. With the Vikings, he played 2 snaps in the slot, 445 off the edge. But I think, again, what's hard when, just to go back to the emailer here, measurables. I agree. I'll trust how you actually play on an NFL field more than I trust necessarily the measurables. But 5'9", maybe with cleats on, and 180, 185 pounds. Does that eventually get exploited once teams have more tape on him, et cetera? So if he's going to regress, I think the question is, does he go back to being a practice squad caliber guy that you're just using in emergencies? Or does he regress to the point like where you can still start him and play him at a high level? So I guess my rambling point here is I want Duke Shelley back. If the Vikings are gonna get in some bidding war for his services because there's other teams that want him, I don't know how high I'm willing to push that. Like, I'd probably just rather go get a 6-foot established 26-year-old cornerback, and there's a few of those guys in free agency. So if I can get him at a discount, I'm in. If he starts to, push toward like the $8, $9, $10 million that some of the other more established cornerbacks are making, I'd probably lean toward that direction. We'll see.
Yeah, they're so thin at cornerback that they pretty much have to bring him back. Yes, there's going to be a degree where they're not going to go past a certain dollar point because he's only played in 11 games for them. But he's going to be back next season, and he's probably going to be relied upon. And how he also performs in training camp and how he fits into Flores' defense will also probably tell how often he's used or even where he's used on the field too.
Yeah, I would think he probably wants to be back too. I mean, it's going to be a different system and scheme and whatnot, but in terms of like some of the players and I guess the other thing is I don't know what the coach turnover is going to be. So maybe the whole thing looks a lot different and it's less appealing. But John Anderson chimes in here via the Score North app. With so few draft picks available this year, we need to use them wisely. Do you guys have insight as to why Ty Chandler or Jalen Nayor can't step up as starters? So I think the point here is, all right, if you only have like 4 draft picks, you know, are you going to really draft another running back if you trade Dalvin Cook? Although if you trade Dalvin Cook, you're going to get at least a 5th draft pick back. My take on this is I'm very, very intrigued by Ty Chandler. I think what he did his last year in college, I think the question is he a 3-down back? Because you can find starting running backs in the 4th, 5th, 6th rounds. You know, that's a pretty common place to find guys that can get out there and carry the ball 150 times. So I'd love to see more Ty Chandler. My guess is if they do trade Dalvin Cook, they probably sign a veteran who makes a lot less money than Dalvin Cook, because there's a ton of like 2nd, 3rd tier running backs on the free agent market. And then you wind up splitting carries between whoever that guy is and Ty Chandler. Jalen Nayor, I don't think you're just going to plug him in as your number 2, because the question here is, could he step up as a starter? Well, he's not. I mean, if Adam Thielen goes away, KJ Osborne's higher up in that pecking order than Jalen Nayor. I mean, I would prefer Jalen Nayor gets some reps. Let's say Thielen goes away, KJ Osborne stays at number 3. Maybe Jalen Nayor now gets some run as a number 4. Go draft, or I don't think you're really going to trade or sign a number 2. So I guess it would be go draft a potential number 2 wide receiver. That's kind of where I'm at. But could they be used more? Absolutely, yes.
On the latter of those 2 players, I think your ceiling or comparable is that Jalen Nayor steps in and is KJ Osborne, right? Like KJ Osborne kind of stepped in year 2, caught 500 or had 500 yards and caught some passes and was a little bit of a deep threat for you. That's probably his comp. Like can he step in and be basically the next KJ Osborne, a guy who was a 3rd round or a day 3 pick that then matured and was able to work out snaps and then got an opportunity and was able to ball out a little bit. With Ty Chandler, I think there's just too much of an unknown there. Like, yeah, he played some decent college football. I would probably trust, though, for them to either, sign a veteran like they've done before and like a Latavius Murray and bring someone else like that in, or you draft someone also that's in the 3rd or 4th round that's probably a more likely week 1 starter for you. I think Ty Chandler's a bit more of an unknown and unproven asset, where Jalen Nayor, I think actually there could be something there. But if they're going to go down the running back route, if they move on from Dalvin Cook and Madison walks in free agency, I think it's more likely they bring in someone from free agency that's a veteran, or they draft someone in day 2 of the draft that's probably going to be a week 1 starter for them. Yeah,
and Ty Chandler, his last year in college, he transferred from Tennessee to North Carolina, and it was a little feast or famine for him, because he had 2 games where he went for 20 carries, $198, 2 touchdowns against Virginia, and then later in the year against Wake Forest, he carried 22 times for 213 and 4 touchdowns, and then he had some other games that were more like Georgia Tech, 17 carries for 48 yards. So it was very feast or famine for him, but the whole thing all added up in his senior year at North Carolina. The guy averaged 6.6 yards per touch, 6 yards per carry, and 14.5 yards per reception, but he only caught 15 passes. He only caught like 1 pass a game, so small sample size alert. I don't know, there's something. I'm not saying that, boom, he starts and he's Dalvin Cook right away, but if you can find whoever your Latavius Murray is from a few years ago. I don't know, is Latavius Murray? He's like 32 now. I think he's actually
playing, yeah.
Maybe it's Latavius Murray.
Yeah.
Let's see here. DL Urbas chimes in via the Score North app. Love your content. Listen daily. You guys haven't been talking enough Cousins for the Cousins lovers or the Cousins haters, but I wanted to throw something out. Wow, this is the first time we've ever been accused of not talking enough Cousins. When's the last time, Declan, we talked Cousins like more than just a passing mention on an episode?
I think we did a feedback Friday 2 Fridays ago. I think that might have been the last time when we were talking about the future of his contract and, would he sign a long-term deal because it would spread out the cap hits. It's probably been a couple weeks.
Well, when was the 49ers trade, the controversial...
yes, that would have been right the day after the championship game. So that would have been
like a week and a half ago.
Monday, week and a half ago. Yeah, about 10 days ago.
See, look at that. We've basically gone a week and a half without talking Cousins, and we're already getting complaints about it. So DL continues. He says, I think all the fighting regarding Cousins is that, first of all, Vikings fans take their fandom very personally. Let me explain. For Cousins lovers, or Crusaders, They're like the person who got a significant other for the first time, and that significant other is a solid like 6 out of 10. She's like a 6 out of 10, or he. They love them, and they think that there is nothing more that could be found to speak of, is such as blasphemy and churlish. Okay. On the other hand, Cousins haters are like scorned lovers who did love another 6 in the past, a Culpepper or whoever, but they got away because they left. They've been burned in the past, so they see this new incarnation. They are skeptical and won't even give it a chance. I do really appreciate your show, and you seem to take a view of a realist and understand that, Cousins, let's see, while he's been good, he hasn't been great, plus the rest of the team, et cetera, et cetera. All right, this kind of rambles, but yeah, I think like the general point here of there is a fear of the grass isn't always greener, which is true. But I think the mistake people fall into is they just look at the quarterback in a vacuum and they say, well, because the argument that I get back when I talk about roster construction, and it's not as much about Kirk is garbage, because no one's saying that. It's about, is Kirk good enough to make that high of a percentage of the cap to build a team around him? You're going to make some mistakes in drafting. You're going to make some mistakes in free agency. You have to be so point perfect when you're paying a non-elite quarterback that much money. And so I look at it more as like a roster construction thing. That's why I bring up Christian Ponder from 10 years ago. He was actually garbage, but because he wasn't making any money, you could afford to pay Adrian Peterson a boatload, and you could afford to pay, I'd have to go back and look at the roster, Brian Robinson, Antoine Winfield, all these guys. And so your roster around him was good enough to drag him to like 10 or 11 wins in the playoffs. There's a bunch of ways to go about getting bounced in the first round of the playoffs, and the Vikings have just sort of found a new way. The last 5 years, it's like, all right, he's one of the best quarterbacks in Vikings history, but that's not really the bar we're looking. Like, that's a pretty low bar. The one of the best quarterbacks in Vikings history. Okay, Fran Tarkenton, if you want to include like the 1 year of Brett Favre, Tommy Kramer, is he one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL? And where does he rank among those guys relative to value and pay scale? So I think Cousins' defenders are defending the player, rightfully so, because he's a good quarterback. He's one of the 12 to 15 best in the world. And the Cousins haters, if you will, aren't hating on him as much. We're poking the 4th down and 8, throwing for 3 yards. Like, we're definitely poking at it. But it's more about how can the team be better. It's not necessarily a linear progression from Cousins to a better quarterback. It's how can the whole team be better and build a championship contender going forward. So
Cousins to me is like I recently in the last 2 months opened up an investment account, right? So like I got investments that that some are in stocks, some are in bonds, some are in foreign. I know, investing my money, and what I realized was, man, when I made my first like investment scale here, I had a lot of my percentage of my investment in bonds, and bonds are safe, right? Like bonds are a safe bet. It's a safe bet. Because it's not really volatile. It's the floor and ceiling of the high and low is going to be in the similar vein. But also, if I'm going to put a large chunk of my money in bonds, well, I'm not going to see a lot of short-term growth. It's going to take a while to really see a lot of growth from the bond.
You also, knock on wood, hopefully, have like 50 years of life left, and so you can afford to take some risks. You don't have much to lose in the short term because you have plenty of time to make it up, which is like the Vikings. The Vikings have never won a Super Bowl before. So, but like, oh my God, what if what's there to lose? They've done everything in franchise history. Their plan should be do whatever it takes to win a Super Bowl, not clutch. Oh, but we've got the 11th best quarterback, and our team is pretty good. Like, we get to the playoffs. You have what do you really have to lose if you're the Vikings?
And I think that's where the point of the bonds I'm trying to make is it feels like we're putting too much stock into the bonds. Like,
Cousins is a bond.
Cousins
is a bond. Yes.
He's a bond, and they're putting too much of their money and their capital and their investments in bonds. Which
Trey Lance is a startup company that you could maybe get burned on,
and that's okay. Do you accept the volatility risk there, and because there's a risk reward? But that's what it reminds me of. Cousins is a bond, but you're putting way too much stock of your portfolio into the bond. Take some of that out. And then you can build something, and you might be able to get a little bit more volatile, a little more risk and factor. That's okay, because it could be an epic payday for you.
Patrick Mahomes is like Apple in 1983 or something. If you got in on that, if you're the Chiefs. Speaking of Cousins, by the way, so in an effort the last couple months to bring everyone together here, which is what we ultimately, sometimes we're divisive, but we're all here for the same reason, which is we want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl. We're bringing the Cousins Crusaders and the Cousins haters, if you will, together for a good cause. He had 8 fourth-quarter comebacks this year. He had just a wonderful stretch of fourth-quarter play. So wherever you fall on the spectrum of Cousins opinions, we are asking people on behalf of the Cousins Crusaders, the crazy Canadian Cousins Crusaders specifically, of Purple Daily, to go to kirkcousins.org and kick a donation over to his charity. $5, $50, whatever it is. We're trying to do some good here. And in the comments of your donation, you can just put that you're one of the Cousins Crusaders of Purple Daily so they know where it's coming from. Also, a shout out to our friends over at Federated Mutual Insurance Company. They've been helping businesses much like a great, well-oiled, competent offensive line for over 100 years. You know, owning a business can have highs, lows. It's just a constant flow of waves, and Federated is here to ride those waves with you with a guiding hand, helping you navigate the waters of running a business. Federatedinsurance.com to find out more about the resources and people that they can provide for you. And remember, at Federated, it's our business to protect yours. All right, Chad from Virginia. Been a listener for just over 3 years now. Love the content. I've read in a few places someone like Keenan Allen could be cut by the Chargers. Is he someone that the Vikings could afford in free agency? And do you guys think he could pair up with Justin Jefferson? So this is an interesting one. My first instinct is that the Vikings should... It would be such a win-now move to try and just bring Keenan Allen in. Like, for me, if I'm thinking about the Vikings replacing Adam Thielen with another wide receiver, I would prefer they draft someone in the first or third round. Probably the first round. I would love to see the Vikings draft a wide receiver. Like, if a Jordan Addison falls, go get another explosive piece to this offensive puzzle. I know a lot of people are going to yell, well, wait a second, their offense is fine. The defense is the thing that needs to be fixed. Well, yes, the offense is better than the defense, but Brian Flores comes in. The scheme will boost the defense. Getting the aging old linebackers out will boost the defense. I think without doing anything else, and just like, maybe you sign a guy that's younger and more spry in free agency to play linebacker or something. I think your defense with Flores and getting younger and faster, Asamoah starting, I think you go from 31st to like 24th or something. I'm interested in taking the 8th ranked points per game offense and making it elite. Because what is the thing that you can hang your hat on? Is it okay, we got the defense up to 18th and the offense is 9th? Well, you're probably going to lose in the first round again. Yeah. If you could replace Adam Thielen with an explosive, young, exciting wide receiver to go along with Hawkinson, Justin Jefferson, Kirk Cousins comes back maybe for the final year of his contract. That's a game changer. That's how you go from another year in the offensive scheme. That's how you go from the 8th best offense to like the 5th, the 4th, the 3rd best offense in the NFL, and then spend the rest of your capital on, third-round picks on linebackers, cornerbacks, whatever it is. Keenan Allen's great, but I think getting younger and less expensive, and getting as Jefferson's contract kicks in too in a couple of years, Dex, you're going to want to have someone that's on a rookie scale deal as his number 2 that you don't really have to pay. Keenan Allen would be a nice little 1 or 2 year stopgap, but it doesn't solve your long-term number 2 wide receiver conundrum right now.
Yeah, Keenan Allen's awesome, man. He's legit one of my favorite receivers in the NFL, but he's 30 going on 31. Last year kind of came down to earth after only playing in 10 games a bit. He's been a Pro Bowler, multiple time Pro Bowler guy, but I mean, the Vikings offense is mostly established here. Like, could they add a Keenan Allen? Could that be like more fun on paper? Oh my gosh, yeah, totally could. But I think he's probably going to ask for a lot of money, and I'd rather them probably take a chance on a wide receiver early than spend a lot of money on Keenan Allen. Now, if it's a 1-year deal, I'm usually in the camp of there's no such thing as a bad 1-year deal. That's a different story. But they need to rebuild the defense, and I don't think it would make a lot of sense once the free agency window opens, and if Keenan Allen is indeed cut, that you're spending a lot of your focus and time trying to get Keenan Allen when you need to basically overhaul that defense and get some type of building blocks to help Brian Flores and help the defense turn around. Love Keenan Allen, and it's a pipe dream a little bit, but I'd rather them focus on other needs.
I actually think, too, I almost feel like, Keenan Allen, even at age 31, is better than KJ Osborne, but I almost feel like their skill sets at this point in their careers are sort of duplicates. The KJ Osborne's a rock solid intermediate in terms of like where he catches passes, an intermediate level receiver. Keenan Allen last year with the Chargers, and maybe some of this is scheme, maybe some of it's play design, but 2/3 of his receptions and targets came either behind the line of scrimmage or within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. The Vikings are looking for someone as a home run threat, potentially, someone that can go down the field. I mean, they didn't really have, outside of a couple KJ Osborne catches here and there, Justin Jefferson was really the only threat beyond 20 yards in the air that was going to do something of substance. Keenan Allen last year was only targeted 12 times on passes beyond 20 yards in the air and only caught 5 passes beyond 20 yards in the air. So, in fairness, he did miss a chunk of games. He only played like 600 snaps, so maybe he would have had, 9 or 10 deep catches if he plays the full season. But he's also on the wrong side of 30, like you said. So, what if the Vikings made a move for Keenan Allen? Would I crucify them? No, he's a really good player. Mm-hmm. But I'd rather see the next generation, someone who's 10 years younger. Hollywood J8. Phil Mackey is a fat clown.
Wow. Just doink the clown.
Yeah, it's awfully mean.
That's really mean. Oh, I'm not fat.
That's a mean-spirited comment. Fani says, with Brian Flores as the defensive coordinator, are we finally going to see the illusion of complexity on defense that was talked about during KOC's press conference? Well, if you guys get a chance, we mentioned this the day after Brian Flores was hired, there are a ton of great YouTube videos. You can just go, like, people breaking down, all 22 film of what he tries to do on defense. It reminds me a little when the Vikings went from that Leslie Frazier sort of cover to a little bit of a 4-3 shell defense in 2012-13, and then Mike Zimmer comes along, and he's the double A gap confusion guy. And how many times, Dex, did you watch a Vikings game, especially like early when the Vikings had young Eric Kendricks and young Harrison Smith and these guys, like, you'd watch a Vikings defensive, like a third down stand, 3rd down and 7, and they would literally have everyone up on the line of scrimmage, press man coverage, and you didn't know who was going to drop back, you didn't know who was going to blitz. They were just creating chaos for the offensive linemen. That's what Brian Flores loves to do with his 3-4 base is, all right, we're going to make it look like it's cover 0, cover 1. Everyone's on the line of scrimmage. We might send 7. We might bail everyone. You have no idea what we're going to do, but we're going to make it very confusing and rely on the youth and the speed to get back into position once the ball snaps. So the answer is yes. He's going to create the illusion of complexity on defense if he does what he did in Miami anyways.
I loved when Zimmer's defense was at its peak, and he obviously turned things around, because up until that piece of my Vikings fandom, if you will, the Vikings have never been known for having just a shut-down defense. They had pieces on defense that were always really good. They had great pass rushers. They had some great cornerbacks, right? They had some really good linebackers, but they never had a full unit that was going to stop you and get a big stop when you needed it on 3rd down. I remember there were so many times during that 15-17 run of Mike Zimmer peak football where the offense was on the field, and it didn't matter if it was Aaron Rodgers or some slappy. You had a pretty good trust that they're going to get a stop here. And that feeling has now been fleeted because of the last 3 years the defense has been so bad. But I'm curious if Brian Flores comes in, if we can have some of that peace of mind again of they can get a stop here. It's not just they need a stop. Yes. No, they're going to get a stop. That was what was so awesome to watch with Zimmer's defense when it was at its peak with such great players. And if Flores can obviously kind of change some of that culture and bring that illusion of complexity where he's rushing safeties a ton or blitzing safeties a ton and figuring out ways to confuse the defense, that I'm all for it.
It felt like, too, like those 2 Giants games, especially the playoff game. All right, 3rd down and 8, whatever, 3rd down and 5. Maybe the Vikings will do a good job in coverage, but the middle of the field is just going to be wide open, and Daniel Jones is going to run for 15 yards. You're right. There was a few years there during the Mike Zimmer era where, especially home games, the crowd's going crazy, AC/DC is blaring, the horns are blowing, and it felt like the offense is screwed. It's 3rd down and 8, and Aaron Rodgers is about to get dumped on his keister. You never really had that feeling last year. maybe I guess the first game against the Packers, the opener in week 1, the defense actually, that was like the best defensive performance of the year.
Yeah.
And maybe it was just week 1 is so weird in the NFL. And plus Aaron Rodgers just like doesn't do anything with his team in the offseason. He like shows up for training camp after, whatever self-discovery venture he went on. And so Aaron wasn't really clicking with the young wide receivers yet. But after that game, it just felt like, as a fan, you're watching just thinking it's 3rd and 12 and there's no chance they make a stop here. Tim Hoover chimes in via the Score North app. Flores has a proven track record of fixing a dumpster fire defense with Miami, where Ejiro Evero was a defensive coordinator for 1 year, inheriting a top 5 defense from Fangio in Denver. Give me Flores all day. I'm happy Evero went to the Panthers. In my eyes, he is still unproven for what the Vikings defense needs. Yeah, I think I agree here, Dex, that after letting this simmer for a while, I mean, Evero, I think, was the Vikings' top choice because he has a longtime connection with both Kevin O'Connell and with Kwesi in his career. But really, like, Flores is the one that has that Miami defense. We talked about that a couple days ago. A bunch of 24, 25-year-old dudes that he inherited. And there was some talent. Like Xavier Howard was one of the starting cornerbacks. I'm not saying it was just like a bunch of practice squad guys. And it was a struggle in the first year, but he took a young group of 23, 24, 25-year-old guys in Miami, and overnight they went from the 32nd ranked scoring defense to the 6th ranked scoring defense. Whereas Evero took over the Vic Fangio and Ed Donatel defense that was already a top 5 defense, and he kind of maintained it. So if you're looking for someone, hey, it's kind of a rebuild here, Brian. And the fact that he signed up for it too, he didn't have to. He could have stayed in Pittsburgh. He might have. I think he withdrew from the Cardinals head coaching job, and he took his name out of the hat for the Denver job. I mean, Brian Flores had options. He didn't have to take sort of a rebuilding defensive gig, but he said, hell yeah, let's do it. Well, let's keep Harrison. Let's keep Danielle Hunter. Let's get younger and faster, and we can make it work. So, yes, the more I think about this, it's an unbelievably great hire by the Vikings.
Yeah, I really liked it too. I mean, dude, the guy can coach defense. That's obviously pretty clear. I know he's got the lawsuits against, and things got really murky and kind of a little bit sticky at the end of the Miami run. But the dude definitely knows defense, and he's coached special teams. He's coached a little bit on both sides of the ball. I love that. I think if you can have a guy that's kind of been at all phases of the game, if you will, and then he clearly can be a good defensive coordinator that this team desperately needs. Yeah, I'm pumped to see him get his teeth into this defense and try to turn some things around.
Yes. Let's see here. Just kind of scrolling through feedback. Elliot Hicks. Love hearing your guys' takes on the outlook of the defense with Flores taking over, but it's hard to be in on the idea of Danielle Hunter sticking around just because he has been a good rusher. If anything, shouldn't Kwesi and Flores' blitz-heavy approach to leverage a trade and get more assets in return for Hunter? We've agreed that 28 to 29 years old is where edge rushers start falling off a cliff. We did an episode on that. We actually did a Should They Trade Danielle Hunter episode a couple weeks ago. You guys should check out. So the most important thing the Vikings should do is look to make key age upgrades where they can. It sounds like you guys are just speculating on Hunter's return more than endorsing it, but I'm curious if Flores' hiring has changed your opinions. One thing is for sure, the Vikings have not done a very good job of sort of having hard conversations about veteran players and getting assets for them before they go off the age cliff. In fact, they've kind of done the opposite. They've hung on to players beyond the age of 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33. And then on top of that, and not getting draft capital for those players, they've traded capital for Jalen Reagor, for, was it Justin Blacklock, the backup defensive lineman, the crappy tight end from the Jets from Herndon from last year. I mean, hell, they traded a second-round pick a couple years ago for Unique Ngakoue and then turned around and traded him for 50 cents on the dollar. So I think that's where the Danielle Hunter discussion about trading him comes from, which is, okay, it's a competitive rebuild. Well, if you're going to compete, then you probably hang on to Hunter. If you're going to rebuild, then you would probably go get like a second or third round pick or both for him. It's hard to have one foot in both of those categories. And like Danielle Hunter is a classic example. Would someone give you a second round pick for him? Probably, maybe more than that.
For sure.
But now you're not going to compete as much because you just lost Danielle Hunter. So they have to sort of figure out, how aggressive do they want to be in getting future assets for some of these players. And Danielle Hunter is going to be up for another contract here.
I would assume that Flores wants to keep him, and they're probably going to do everything in their power in the first priority of keeping him, extending him, trying to figure that out. I know that's been really sticky for the last few years, but that's probably their priority number one. Priority two is obviously trading him because you potentially could get a lot for him, but they have to probably be careful, right? Because if they make it known, or if Danielle makes it known that his contract's unhappy and he's going to want out regardless, does that hurt his trade value? Does a team not want to give up as much because they also have to pay him? So there's like a little bit of an interesting wicket that they got to balance here. But I think in general, Flores would obviously want to keep him. He's the most unique piece on that defense and their best piece on that defense going forward. So priority one's obviously keeping Danielle Hunter. But to be honest, if they could get a haul for him, I wouldn't rule that out, and I wouldn't be completely against it either.
And the other factor here is too, and we sometimes do like to get into the weeds on this show and talk about like salary cap ramifications. Nathan chimes in here, Nathan Farah via the Score North app, and says, "Love what you guys do. I just want to say you keep talking about trading Hunter. The thing is, I don't think you realize is if you trade that contract, it actually costs you more to the cap, and that is partially true. So if you were to trade Danielle Hunter, like with a pre-June 1st designation, and if you wanted to free up cap space for March free agency, you would look to create space, obviously, in the next month or so. So if you were to trade Danielle Hunter sometime in the next month, let's say, yeah, it would actually cost you $18 or $19 million to the cap, whereas his cap number is 13 this year. Of course, his base is 5, and he's going to want some certainty for the future. So there's the cap ramifications with the contract as constructed. There's what he wants to make, and then there's what would it look like if you decided that you couldn't reach an agreement and you wanted to trade him. If you did a post-June 1st designated trade, the cap hit would be much different. So his cap hit is 13, the dead money is 7.5, and so you'd actually save, if you waited till after June 1st to trade him for like a second-round pick for next year, you'd save like $5.5 or $6 million to your cap, but it wouldn't help you in free agency in March. So it's a tough one. That's probably even more of a reason. If you can't get value for him for this year's draft or for this year's free agency, then wouldn't you just rather play him in Brian Flores' system and
exactly
maybe milk the last year of his age curve? So he's probably coming back. Zadarius Smith is probably the biggest question because he's older and he was banged up and not as effective in the second half of the season. And his cap hit is actually higher if the contract stays as constructed. It's higher than Danielle Hunter's cap hit in 2023. But the Vikings, so Zadarius' cap hit is the 5th highest right now on the team behind Kirk, Adam Thielen, Brian O'Neill, Harrison Smith. It's 15.5, but there's only 1.6 in dead. So they could cut or trade Zadarius before June 1st and save almost $14 million to the salary cap. So that's kind of their leverage to go to him and say, all right, we need some cap space, so you're a really easy cap casualty, but we also think you're still a really good player if your knee contusion heals up, which it should. That's just a contusion. So could they restructure Zadarius? But then would he say, wait a second, even with a knee contusion, I was like 4th in pressures this year and was my old self, so I want to make top dollar as an edge. And Danielle says, I want to make top dollar as an edge. You probably can't pay both those guys as like top 6 or 7 edge rushers at their ages. So just one of like a million conversations the Vikings are going to be having over the next month. It's very complicated.
Yeah, the whole thing is super messy to figure out. And I mean, I know Rob Brzezinski's a wizard and he should be able to, make some magic here. But man, this is one of like 5 insane contract situations that the Vikings have to deal with here with being so pressed up against the cap.
Yep. Yes. So, in fact, pretty much it's amazing. Here are the top cap hits for the Vikings this year. I'm going to read these one by one, and you tell me if it's messy or not. I think most of these are messy for them to figure out. Okay. Kirk Cousins, kind of messy.
Kind of messy.
Because he's going to want an extension.
Yeah.
Justifiably so. The Vikings might want to play ball there, but we'll see. Adam Thielen, it's messy.
Messy.
Brian O'Neill, probably the least messy, unless his Achilles is shot or something.
Yeah, there's some wiggle room there, but yeah, less messy.
Harrison Smith, a little messy because you can't do a $19 million cap hit for a 34-year-old safety. Zadarius and Danielle we went over. Dalvin Cook. That's definitely messy.
Messy. A lot of
They
money
can
thrown
save
back.
$11 million to the cap by saying goodbye to him via trade or cut. Eric Kendricks. I don't even know if that's messy, actually.
I don't think it's messy. I think it's easy. I think you cut him. I think that's pretty easy to do.
Yeah, unless somebody wants to trade a 5th-round pick. They just need some veteran leadership at linebacker or something. So, anyhow, the big game is coming up this weekend.
Big game.
And I saw you posted on Twitter here that what's that over-under on Jalen Hurts now? That you can just use it as part of a parlay on Underdog?
It is 0.5 yards. Total yards. 0.5 total yards here. So actually I did a little 3-pick slip. Let's take a touchdown for Miles Sanders, rushing or receiving, and a Travis Kelce receiving touchdown. And you know if Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs are in the red zone there, you're looking at Travis Kelce. So as long as Jalen Hurts has 1 total yard, passing, rushing, even receiving, that first leg of this parlay automatically hits. It's a special going on for new users and current users on Underdog Fantasy. If you are a new user, though, you use promo code SCORE, SKOR, and they'll match your first deposit up to $100. With the big game coming up, I mean, we're talking about some of the best possible slips to bet on all year, right, at the big game. So go to Underdog Fantasy, promo code SCORE, SKOR, they'll match your first deposit up to $100.
Awesome. All right, that's your Feedback Friday on a Thursday here on Purple Daily Vikings Entertainment. 365 days a year, we are your home for reckless Vikings off-season speculation and discussion. So thank you to everyone who has either found us recently or maybe you've been listening or watching for a number of years. We appreciate you. And if you could do us a favor and click the subscribe button and the like button on the Purple Daily YouTube channel and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review on Apple Podcasts, it helps spread the word about this Vikings fan community you guys are helping us build. We'll see you tomorrow on Purple Daily.